Groome, St. George's class of 1982. Katie Wales, I'm going to call her, because that's the way she was known at St. George's, class of 1980. I was class of 1970, but did not graduate, and Ann is a class of 1980. Last night we posted a response to the 12-page St. George's report on our Facebook page and distributed it to victims first and then alumni. The report responds to a document that was put out by the trustees on December 23rd. Our response is 36 pages long. It contains multiple exhibits. It's very factual, it's very detailed, and it sets out, we think, what is the truth, as far as we know it right now, about what occurred at St. George's. Since Bella English of the Boston Globe published her article on December 14th, we have been contacted by more than 32, I think is the present total, victims of sexual abuse at St. George's School. We've also identified 8 others from prior litigation, including Ann and Katie here today. We have identified 7 individuals who worked at St. George's School who are alleged to be perpetrators of sexual abuse. The St. George's report identified, I believe, 6. We have some ones that they don't have, and vice versa. 4 of those people are still alive, and we're going to be talking about some of them today. We're identifying 2 of them today. One is Franklin Coleman, who was the choir director at St. George's School until he was terminated on the advice of counsel. He was terminated in 1988. He was not reported to the police. He was not reported to the Rhode Island Child Protection Authorities. He was accused of molesting multiple boys, but no report was made. And he went on to a 20-year career in teaching and working currently in New York City as an assistant substitute choir director. We're also going to talk about another St. George's employee who is named Howard White. He was the assistant chaplain at St. George's in the early 1970s. We have letters that we can give you from Mr. Zane, the then headmaster, terminating Reverend White for sexually molesting boys. The allegations against both of these individuals are extremely serious. In Reverend White's case, it involves rape. We are dealing in a different form from Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, it has no statute of limitations for rape, so it is entirely possible. We've been in touch multiple times with the Rhode Island State Police over the last week. They're going to be speaking to a number of our clients, and this is one of those few cases where there actually could be successful prosecutions of individuals who raped other students at St. George's. We've identified 4 student perpetrators of rape. Mr. Groome is going to talk about one of those instances right now. We've been asked by law enforcement not to identify those individuals, the students, not the faculty, but the students who are alleged to have engaged in sexual molestation and rape. What I really want to start with is a quote by Peter Brooks, who wrote about what private schools do over past allegations of sexual abuse and what they do with their alumni, what they do in their community. And he put it very simply, and I think it's very true. What schools do in response to reports of abuse defines them. So, for example, at Deerfield School, within 2.5 hours after an alumnus reported past abuse by a teacher, the headmistress at the school sent out a letter to alumni within 2.5 hours and generated responses and talked to those alumni and said things like, "How are you doing? What can I do to help?" In this case, by contrast, allegations of sexual abuse have been known to St. George's really since Al Gibbs was there, continuing on into 1988 when Ann Scott brought litigation against the school, where she was actually pummeled in that litigation and dropped it. She had to get the assent of St. George's to drop that case, and St. George's imposed a gag order on her, which was continued in August of 2015 by Headmaster Peterson. And we had the email that shows that. It was eventually released, but she was prohibited by St. George's from talking publicly from 1988 to September 28th, 2015. And that's a marked difference from all of the schools that we've dealt with. And even religious organizations haven't done things like that in a long time. Ann lived in silence. What we're talking about today in terms of what the administration at the school knew is not from the distant past. We're talking about reports that were made to the school in 2004, 2006, 2011, 2012, and ongoing. This is not just a story about, or it's really not a story for these people. And for us, this is a story, this is something about our school that we went to, that our parents trusted to take care of their children. But this is not just about something that happened 3 decades ago. I've been asked by a number of you what's unique about this case, and I think there's a number of things that are unique. It's really not a case. It's a story, a very powerful and emotional story about people who have been coping with this for a long period of time, some of them better than others. What it really is unique is that the imposition of silencing orders on people who are victims of sexual abuse, it's unique because of the magnitude and scope. We have 40 individuals right now, including the 32 that we've spoken to since December 14th. That figure will go up. It always does. Carmen Durso and I have been doing this for a long time. We represented together over 300 victims in the clergy abuse cases in the early part of the century. So that figure is going to rise. So the magnitude and scope of this is already approaching the largest private school sexual abuse case that we've seen, which was Horace Mann, where there were 62 victims that came forward. It's also unique in terms, as I said earlier, of prosecution. People can be prosecuted. It's also unique in the sense that we have perpetrators out there today, alleged perpetrators, one of whom admitted it according to the SDS, St. George's report, who are out there today and working in unsupervised settings where they have access to minors. And that's why we felt so strongly that we had to identify those people today. I'd like to, before I introduce Ann, I just would like to end with what Mr. Brooks said in his article in May of 2005 about private schools. He said they should ask for students and alumni to reach out to them with information. They should offer support without conditions of releases or gag orders. They should begin an immediate and independent investigation. They should show compassion and respect for victims. They should assure victims who have silent that they are safe in speaking up. They should take care not to re-injure victims along the way. We have had multiple back-channel communications with St. George's over the past several weeks, and we have heard a trustee, for example, refer to the people who are sitting here today as swarming insects that want to go after the school's endowment. Those kinds of remarks are outrageous. These people are here today because they care about St. George's, because they want it to be a positive place where alumnus and current students are welcomed, are taken care of, are shown love, respect, and compassion. And people are here today because they want to transform this school and many others into institutions that not only put out wonderful statements about their mission, which is always filled with justice, respect, compassion, care, and love. We want St. George's, and they want St. George's, to be a place that not only puts out a mission statement, but lives by it. I would now like to introduce Ann Scott, who started all of this. Were it not for Ann Scott, we would not be here today. Ann Scott, as I said, was a victim of Albert Gibbs when she was taken in through the boys' locker room to a training room where Al Gibbs did his horrific abuse on females. That training room was locked, had the ability to be locked, it always was. It had the ability to have blinds pulled down over it. And Ann isn't going to go into the details of what occurred there. It's already been in the...
Thank you.
Okay, you want to take a moment? You want to step down, Katie? You okay?
Breathe. I'm right.
Okay. So we know what happened there. We know what happened there. Ann had the courage to come forward in 1988. It was suggested by the lawyer for St. George's at the first hearing to have her name sealed as Jane Doe, that her name needed to be public because there may be evidence that this woman, this girl, 15-year-old girl, allegedly had consensual relations with Al Gibbs, then a 67-year-old man. We have the transcript of that court hearing. The lawyer who said that, William Robinson, is currently a justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court. And I think that he needs to respond to why he did that and why this family was so dreadfully pummeled. Ann and I lost touch after that case. She was working in places like the Gaza Strip as the head of the UN maternal health care program in the Gaza Strip. She fled. She fled. Other victims fled as well. But she came back, we reconnected, and we've been trying to work patiently with the school since March. This was never what we wanted. But we got nowhere. We got flim-flam. We got continuation of gag orders. And finally, we got basically a kiss-off email from Mr. Peterson, you got it, saying, I hope we run into each other someday in the future. That occurred on the same day he continued the gag order on August 27th, 2015. So that's why we're here. So it's their turn to speak now. The school's spoken, the school has acted and not acted, and now it's time for the victims to speak. So I'd like to introduce Ann Scott. Again, we would not be here without her.
Our hero.
Okay. Yeah, well, Eric has outlined a fair amount of my story. I was repeatedly raped by Al Gibbs for a 2-year period during my time at St. George's. I was threatened not to tell him. If I told anyone, he would come after me and I would be in trouble. I said nothing to anyone. I developed an eating disorder. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative disorder, major anxiety and depression. I stopped talking or communicating with people, interacting with people for prolonged periods of time. After that, my parents did get me into therapy when I was in college, and through that I was hospitalized 4 times, 1 time for a prolonged period during my early 20s. My parents did bring a lawsuit, my name was on the lawsuit when I was 27 years old. They were concerned for my future. They didn't know how I was going to retain a job or have a family or cope in my adult life. And they wanted nothing more than to make sure I was taken care of and had some sense of security. The school, as Eric mentioned, tried to not make me use my name and said that my sex with Mr. Gibbs was consensual or that I was a habitual liar. William Robinson said that. What Eric did not say is that they also threatened to try to find something wrong with me or my family that predated the abuse. They sent out depositions to our entire home community trying to find something, and that placed a serious strain on my family. My parents put them into a major depression too, and my father stopped eating for 2 weeks. He was so distraught by that. It nearly tore our family apart, and I couldn't really make that choice between tearing my family apart and the lawsuit or the justice that I wanted, the restitution I wanted from the school. So I did drop the case. As Eric's explained, the school then required that for them to agree for me to drop the case, the school required that I sign a gag order. I have been gagged for the last 25 years, and I want to say how damaging those gag orders are. They seal in the trauma. When you're raped, your voice is stolen, your soul is taken away, and all that a gag order does is preserve the institution's reputation and seal the trauma inside the victim, making it that much harder to reach out and get help, and much less have relationships of trust with people where you can openly talk about your life experiences. I did go away. I've lived overseas for most of my adult life. I came back home in 2013, and that's when Eric and I 2014, we reconnected. I came back in November of 2013. And that is because Eric had written the school in 2012, unbeknownst to me, and Peterson kept saying, where's your client, where's your client? We don't want to talk to you without your client. He didn't know where I was. He did eventually find me, and I felt, well, if it's going to help other victims, I would be happy to talk to the school. I went into that in early 2015 with a little bit of hope, wanting to turn over a new page with a new administration, new leadership at the school. We first tried to reach out to the school in April of 2015. Eric drafted a sample letter that was a good practice, good example letter for Peterson to send out. After Eric sent out that letter, they canceled the meeting. We persevered, and we did get a meeting in May of 2015, where Peterson asked me to tell my story. We put forward at that meeting a number of asks of the school. We have an online petition that reiterates those asks. We believe that they are reasonable and within the power of the school to do. The first one is to set up a functioning, user-friendly victims assistance fund so that victims can get reimbursed for the portion of their therapy costs that is not covered by insurance. We believe that that's well within the means of the school to do. We asked for an independent investigation with full disclosure of the findings of that investigation. We also believe it's within good practice, as Eric mentioned, and within the power of the school to do. I asked to meet with the board at their June meeting. Peterson said, well, we'll see what we can do, but there was no meeting, no response was forthcoming. I did meet with Eric Peterson and Leslie Haney in June of 2015 and reiterated my asks. In my case, I also wanted to see what documentation the school had on my particular lawsuit. I've asked for that about 15 times. That's important for my own healing, just to know the facts of the case. And I've never seen that documentation that the school has, and it's not been forthcoming to me. I also asked, as Eric mentioned, to be released from the gag order. And in August, Peterson wrote and said that he'd be happy for me to talk to my family and friends and therapist about what happened to me. And it was nice knowing me, which I took to mean he wasn't going to release me from the gag order. It wasn't until Eric talked to Will Hannum, the investigator, who I'll come back to in a moment, saying that we were going to go to Rhode Island Court to try to get the gag order voided. I received no consideration. I received no settlement. I've never received anything from the school, despite the fact that I was gagged. Peterson's letter said there was going to be an investigation. I think myself and many other victims participated that. We were encouraged by that. We participated in good faith. We were forthcoming, only to learn later that the investigator, Will Hannum, was a partner of the school's counsel, Sarah Schwartz. And that, I'll speak for myself, I felt very betrayed by that in terms of how the school was prepared to deal openly and honestly with us. And that is why, yes, the school did issue a report on December 23rd. It is a sanitized version of the truth. We've tried to mobilize all the facts we have to hand in our response that we're releasing today. But we believe an independent investigation is absolutely imperative, and it's in line with good practice.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. Harry, do you want to move over? I'll move over to Harry so you can sit right there.
No, she's okay. She's gonna stay right here.
Probably should stay.
Yeah, I'm Harry Groome, and I was publicly raped while at St. George's as a freshman in 1978 by a fellow student with at least 5 witnesses. I kept that to myself and never contacted the school until I had enough courage to do so in 2002 when I wrote a letter to the then headmaster Chuck Hamblett, laying out in graphic detail what happened to me, making the school aware of this crime, asking them what they're going to do about it. And my primary intention was to make sure that the school then was a safe place for kids and that something like this would never happen. I received an acknowledgement of the letter, but I never got the meeting I was looking for. I put that away for another 10 years, actually about four years, when Eric Peterson came on board to be the headmaster. I forwarded him the letter I had sent to Hamblett, just making sure that he was aware that I was on record with this crime in 2002. His response to me was again unsatisfactory, putting the onus on me to decide what I wanted to do with this situation. That put me back in the dark until 2012, when a Boston Globe article about another school came out where a new headmaster was dealing with past abuse issues up front and head on, even though they were completely uncomfortable. And I asked Mr. Peterson what the school was doing to ensure that something like this wouldn't happen, and what they're doing to uncover all of the abuses that have been reported and not been responded to. Mr. Peterson offered me a meeting, which I took. I met with him at St. George's in October of 2012. And I told him, I named my perpetrator. I gave him graphic details of how I was raped, and that the school had not responded at all in the past 10 years of me formally addressing the situation. Mr. Peterson, instead of reporting this to the police or advising me on what I could do, gave me a copy of the school handbook, assured me that the school was a safe place, and sent me on my way. I did not receive a follow-up email, no correspondence at all from him until 2015, when I contacted Will Hannum after the letter St. George's sent out. My first conversation with him, I was very nervous to talk to him. I made him ensure that this was confidential between us, that it would go no further, that he was an independent investigator. So I told him my whole story, and only to find out that about a couple months later, I got an email from Eric Peterson telling me how disappointed he was to find out that I had said some unflattering things about Peterson to Will Hannum during my conversation. So Will Hannum was not an independent investigator. He reported every conversation I had to him, to Eric Peterson, and I have the emails to prove it. Eric Peterson has been covering this up since 2004, my issue as well as others. And my sole reason for being here today and for coming out and coming out in public is to provide a forum for the victims, many of who are male and don't have the comfort level to talk about this, and the number of people that have come forward, not related to my case, but to other cases there, and confided in me over the past 2 weeks, has been remarkable. My other reason for coming forward is to hold the administrations responsible for covering this up. And I include Hamblett and I include Peterson in those administrations. And the final reason is I have friends who have kids at the school, and I want this school to be a place that they can be proud of, that gets back to the place we all thought we were going to, a place that taught me to be honest, to stand up for what I believe in, to right wrongs, and they have done none of that. And I want this school to thrive in the future, but it cannot thrive until we flush out the bad. And Eric Peterson has got to go. He has to resign. The board has to have the guts to either fire him, or he's got to have the guts to step down. This stuff can't go on anymore. It's ruined lives. And it's ruining and affecting lives of 400 young kids there right now who had nothing to do with this, who went there to a school that should be loved and can still be a great place. It can be a great place tomorrow if Eric Peterson does the right thing today. Thank you.
Katie?
Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
I was used to go to see Gibbs a lot. I had injured my back horseback riding, and like they said, we had to be led through the boys' locker room, and then he locked us in the little training room. And there was I have to work on your back, but you can't have your t-shirt or your bra on because I can't work on your muscles that way. And then that turned around into, well, I have to work the front muscles also. And then, oh, let me show you how to dry yourself under your, in private areas, this and that. Then there was times where I'd go in there and, oh, you have acne. I'm going to put a heat lamp on your face and cover your eyes. And one particular time I do remember a flash going off or hearing the sound of a Polaroid. And I confronted him with it, and he said nothing. Within days of that, I guess he had shown it to the boys in the varsity locker room. And that's when the taunting started. And it was absolutely horrible. I became known as the slut of the school, that I would show my body to anybody. I was pinned down by the same perpetrator that assaulted Harry, tickled and let me see. And I went to see Tony Zane. I couldn't take the harassment anymore, and I walked into his office. I told him what happened. He looked at me and said, "You are just a distraught young lady. You are mentally unstable," and then didn't believe me, and proceeded to completely ignore what I told him. And I think that's what upset me more about anything else, is the fact that he didn't believe me, and it still happened to other girls after me. Nothing was done. Nothing was reported. And then from that day on, anything that went wrong at St. George's was blamed on me. And I instead turned to heavy use of alcohol, smoking marijuana. By the end of my senior year, I was pretty much of an alcoholic, dabbling in LSD, mushrooms, cocaine. And then a week before graduation, he proceeded to kick me out. And I had been out drinking with quote-unquote townies, God forbid. And got into a bad car accident. I wasn't driving. But I needed medical help, and then the teacher who came to help me had to turn me in and threw me out a week before graduation. No diploma. I got a Rhode Island equivalency diploma, and was told never to step on campus again. And I went back for my 10th reunion just to see some friends, and Tony Zane was there, and he looked at me. He says, "I threw you out of here. You shouldn't be on campus." 10 years later, he said it again 20 years later. I do go back on occasion just to see my friends. I mean, St. George's I made some amazing friends. One of them's right over there. And it hurts. My parents didn't believe me, the school didn't believe me, and nothing was done. And this happened again, and he wasn't fired until about a year and a half after I told Tony Zane. So Tony knew about it and did nothing. And I was made to believe that I was nuts. He also, upon my being thrown out of school, contacted Brown University, which I was on the waiting list for, and told them to revoke their acceptance of me, because I was too anti-establishment and rebellious for my own good, which they did. So at last minute, I applied to Boston University and got in and went to Boston, and that's where my life changed. I guess going into a school where there's so many people from a huge walk of life, but I buried a lot of this, and again, just continued on with the partying and the numbness, and it wasn't until I got called to be deposed in Ann's case that things started to click in the head. And I remember at the deposition of being very intimidated by the lawyers. The dean of students was there, who was just staring at me, and he was a very scary guy. And basically, trying to just destroy Anne, destroy me. Found out from another girl who was deposed that the questions they asked her about me, she said, were just horrifying. And they even went after my sister, who was a straight-A student, So yeah, St. George's just went out to kill it. And then I found out St. George's named a dorm in honor of Tony Zane. And that a girls' dorm is named after Tony Zane. And my mission in all this was basically, there are so many girls that he did to me, he did to so many others. There were a few that he did physically rape, and that's just, to me, horrible. Beyond belief. And I want his name off that building. and I want him held accountable. I want him to. He destroyed me. And it took a long time for me to get myself back, and I'm back. But so thank you, and I'm sorry I cried throughout the whole interview, but I'm going to be fine.
One of our clients has been in touch with us and recently decided to have his name used concerning Reverend White. His name is William McNamara. He lives in Pennsylvania. I think he would have wanted to be here today. But Carmen Durso would like to say a few words about Mr. McNamara and Reverend White.
Yes, I'll listen next to him, please.
I'm a poor substitute for the brave people that you've heard speak here today and for the many other brave individuals who've talked to us. It's extraordinary to see people who have the courage to come forward and talk about these things, because Eric and I have both spoken to hundreds of people who simply can't speak. And everyone who's speaking to you here today is speaking on behalf of those people who are unable to do it for themselves.
I.e. Beach, I love you. Kim, I love you. There's somebody out there.
William McNamara was a 14-year-old boy who attended St. George's, and he was a young man who said he felt kind of like a fish out of water. And there was a Episcopal priest there. His name was Howard White. People refer to him as Howdy. And Howard White took him under his wings, and Howard White proceeded to sexually abuse him, both on campus and on trips that he took him on to other places, West Virginia, a couple of places in Canada. He took him camping. He said that one of the camping trips in Nova Scotia, he actually got away from him and he went to a farmhouse, and he told me he remembered the names of the people at the farmhouse. It's all these years, and he said that name is just indelibly in my mind. And I went there and I tried to tell them that something wrong was happening. And before I really could, he said, Father White walked in there and said, oh, everything's fine. And he said, just the way he would on any other occasion, he was able to convince them that there was nothing wrong. I was just a little upset, and my attempt to escape just simply didn't work. The abuse went on for a couple of years, and sometime in the second year, he found the strength to talk to Tony Zane. And Tony Zane said, I find this very hard to believe, and you don't have any verification, so proof. So why should I believe you? And he said, well, I don't really want to tell you this, but there's another boy who was also abused by him. And if you talk to him, you'll find out that, in fact, I'm not the only one. Well, we know that Zane talked to the other boy because the other boy went to William McNamara and said, why did you give them my name? Obviously, he could only have known that unless Zane talked to him, and obviously only if Zane told him that Mr. McNamara was the person who led him into this. So what did they do? You'll see a couple of letters in the files. I think they're at Exhibit DD. One of the letters is a letter from the school to Mr. McNamara's parents. And it's very revealing because what it says is that no one's really asked any questions about why Howdy has left the school, because the story we've told, they were accepting that. And clearly what that meant was that they had told the students something other than the fact that he had left the school because he'd been abusing boys there. And then you'll see another letter between Zane and Howdy. And in this letter, you'll see talk about the financial arrangements they're making with him because he's leaving. They're talking about how they hope that he will be okay. And interestingly enough, they say that you can't come back to the school for a generation. Now, you'd like to believe that meant 20 years, but in fact, what it meant was 4 to 5 years. In other words, in 4 to 5 years, you can come back here. Unlike our friend Katie here, who isn't supposed to come back after 10 years. So, why are we telling you about this particular individual? Because he remained an Episcopal priest. If you look him up today, you'll see that he's listed in a church in Pennsylvania, where he's listed as what they call a supply priest, someone who fills in. You'll see that he's had a family with children, and you'll see that in his resume, he lists a number of places that he has worked after leaving St. George's. And in many of those places, he clearly has had access to other children. What Eric would tell you and what I would tell you is our experience is that people who sexually abuse kids don't stop doing it. We had a case involving a priest who was abusing kids down in Plymouth when he was 86 years old. The fact that he's an older man now doesn't mean that he can't abuse people. But the important thing here is that St. George's did nothing to warn other people about him. Since they've become aware of the fact that these allegations were made, they've done nothing to contact any of the other institutions. And we hope that if one of the things we accomplish today is to get the word out about him so that other institutions can determine whether or not they have reason to be concerned about the fact he was there.
Let me just say just a few brief words in conclusion.
Are we going to mention Kosef at all?
Dr. Kosef was the school counselor that Katie was sent to see in 1979 when Mr. Zane diagnosed her as being mentally ill. Dr. Kosef reported those conversations to the headmaster, even though they were privileged. Dr. Kosef was also involved in the 1988 termination of Mr. Coleman. He was a mandated reporter under Rhode Island law at the time. He did not report, and he's still practicing. Let me just say just a few things in conclusion, then we'll take questions. Private schools like to talk a lot about community, particularly during their fundraising campaigns. And when they talk about community, they mean the students who are there, their parents, and they always include the alumni. And what we'd like to say to the school today is, and to the Board of Trustees and Mr. Peterson, this is the faces of your community right here, right now. And this is what they're saying. And there's a lot of other people, as Carmen said, brave people who would want to be here today but can't do it right now. And Mr. Peterson, Board of Trustees, your community has members who are ill, they need help, they are victims who are lying on the veritable battlefield. And what you do now, in the next several days, in the weeks to come, will define whether you are a place where there are moral values, where there is compassion, where there's respect, where the message that you try to instill of all of your students will have any credibility or will tumble as merely another platitude and outright hypocrisy. So this is a chance for St. George's to include these people, these members of your community, and hear what they have to say. Okay, so we'll take some questions now.
Eric, was there something about the culture at St. George's that allowed this to happen? Were they related, or these are separate things? Was this a cultural issue?
Well, first of all,
I think it was very chauvinistic. The school had only gone co-ed in '73. We had no facilities, no dressing room for the girls, locker rooms for girls, or anything like that, and it was still very much boys, boys' school. We just happened to be there, and I think we ended up being the victims.
Let me just be clear about one thing. No matter, and we've got pictures of the casino night where the girls dressed up as Playboy bunnies and sold this fake sold candy to the boys, and there was certainly misogynist things that happened at St. George's even for that time, but people who sexually abuse children and rape and pillage them, they just look for places to go. And you cannot discount or excuse predatory sexual behavior because there was a bad culture at the time. It's like, it reminds me of what Cardinal Law used to say, and others. This is a problem related to homosexuality. This is not true. No cultural explanation exists for even 17 and 8-year-old predators raping 14-year-old boys in their first semester. No culture exists which allows someone like Reverend White to take boys out of school to hotel rooms in Boston and sleep with them. There's no cultural, there never was and there never will be any cultural explanation for predatory behavior. And there is no explanation, quite frankly, for an environment like St. George's School, which allowed these predators dressed up like sheep to prey like wolves on children at the school.
You use the word allowed as if it's past tense. Do you worry now about students who are there now?
No.
May be victims now?
Not at all.
Why not?
Because the one thing I got out of my meeting with Eric Peterson in 2011 was a full understanding of the systems that are in place that allow students to anonymously report these things or to go to their advisor. There aren't the repercussions. They have counselors on staff. It's a completely different place than it was.
Yes, I agree, but I would also say to the leadership of the school that you must always remain vigilant. You can say that you have state-of-the-art policies, practices, and procedures, but if you're telling me that's done and dusted, you don't understand how these predators work.
True.
They are very clever. They're very sneaky. They're very good at covering their tracks. And so I would say, as part of, and I totally applaud what Harry is saying, we want the school, we don't wish to harm the school, we want the school to do the right thing and come out stronger. And part of that means being ever vigilant, because they have a duty of care to children.
We have no allegations against any current faculty member at St. George's School. I think you have to ask yourself the question, any policy is only good as the leaders that implement it and follow it. We don't have any indication, quite frankly, whether it's being followed or not, but we'd like to ask St. George's, why, if you have such great policies, did you silence victims in 2015? Why did you not report people in 2011 and 2012? Why was it not until Bella English called up Mr. Peterson on October 30th that you contacted the police? As far as we know, that was the first time in November, after Ms. English called Mr. Peterson for a comment. He couldn't get back to her because he was busy drafting an alumni letter that weekend. I'll let those two facts speak for themselves. But it was only after that that the Rhode Island State Police were contacted. So you just need to keep these things in mind. We have any indication that there's any safety issues at St. George's right now, but we have very serious questions about the judgment of leaders that are responsible for implementing those policies.
Eric, how many headmasters or leaders there, since these incidents have gone along with the existing culture there, leading up to today?
How many of them failed to report? Zane, Andrews, Hamlet, and Peterson. All of them. I think there may have been one person in the middle. Well, Archer Harmon was the interim head who came back during the Scott litigation to stare across me from me at the table and try to stare down every witness that had the courage to come forward. But we don't have anything concerning Archer Harmon. He was a veteran headmaster. When I was there, we don't have anything about him. But I think I think pretty much everybody swept this under the rug, and that's really what's extraordinary. There's a guy who was the dean of students who supposedly got a first-hand report of abuse in 2004, and we're still working on this one. We haven't discussed it today. But this guy, who was accused by several students of inappropriate conduct, he left the school. He was made to leave the school as a dorm parent, but no report was ever made. So we're not talking about the 19th century here. We're not just talking about the 1950s or the 1980s or the 1990s. And where is the Board of Trustees on this stuff? Where are they? They have refused to communicate with their community, with these people. I mean, we started this as an effort by alumni and me to try to make the school better. She couldn't get a meeting with the trustees to talk about this issue. So we're talked a lot about Mr. Peterson today, but there's a really open question here. What is going on with the Board of Trustees?
The Board of Trustees is ultimately responsible. They are the governance structure of this school, and they really need to meet with us.
Do you all agree that Mr. Pearson should be fired or stepped down?
Yes.
I felt duped by him. I had met with him in May when I went back for just went to the reunion so I could talk to him, but the letter had come out and I was very upset by it. Wanted to know why. And he was such a smooth talker, and at one point, like I did today, I fell apart. He actually had tears coming down his eyes, and this investigation will get back to you, and it should be done in 2 months. Called him in 2 months, he didn't respond, called him again, said, oh, it'll be in there a few more months, and now he's getting in stonewalled. So he's a really, as someone once said, he's a really good car salesman, used car salesman. And
And I lead an organization myself. I would say, as a chief executive officer, whether it's of a school or another type of organization, you are paid to take care of issues, to manage them, to execute behind them, to act. And our asks, frankly, could be executed in a matter of days with the right management and leadership and will. And it's not for me to assess his performance, that's for the board. But I would say I don't understand the problem in acting on these requests that have been tabled.
I always figured it
now
was the
for
board
11
that was
months.
keeping him quiet.
Well, we don't know the answer to
Yeah.
that question. We don't know the answer to that question, so we're not privy to it. I think you have to ask a number of questions of the school right now. Why were people gagged in 2015? Why was Harry not listened to? Why was a Gibbs victim in 2012 made to sign a confidentiality and non-disparagement agreement? Why did this happen? Why weren't schools notified? This was never forgotten. This has always been a part of the school and the school lore. Mr. Peterson told us in our first meeting that he knew all about Mr. Gibbs.
There was a picture in the 1979 yearbook of a young lady standing next to Gibbs, and the quote underneath says, "Mr. Gibbs, please take your hand off my ... elbow." I mean, if that's not common knowledge, I don't know what is.
He was never forgotten. He was never forgotten.
It was.
There were always people. The board knew. We've talked to former trustees. As part of the intro packet for one trustee in 2000, and year 2000, he was given an orientation that included, there's this athletic trainer.
Oh, jeez.
And we have a problem with this, and we either settle or basically we beat people up. And he's willing to come forward and talk about, this was part of the board orientation.
Mayor, have you spoken to police yet about your perpetrator?
No, I'm going to meet with them tomorrow.
Do you think or hope there'll be a criminal charge brought?
I need to know more about the whole situation.
Yes. When victims here say they want an independent investigation, if they want to do that, and also can you respond to the Rhode Island State Police saying that they think an independent investigation could actually hurt their own investigation because there could be duplicate stories.
Right. I mean, let me respond to the first part. Look, there's a long precedent for independent investigations. Look at what happened in Penn State, where Louis Freeh, former FBI director, came in, and as part of an independent investigation, you always have to look at current leadership. Current leadership was insulated in this investigation. Mr. Hannum, Deerfield class of 1982, Mr. Peterson, Deerfield class of 1983. I don't know whether they knew each other. I assume they did. The law firm represented the school. That was not disclosed in the first letter that was sent out by Eric Peterson that everybody responded to, dated April 7th, when he said there's going to be an independent investigation. What he didn't say is that the person doing the investigation was the law partner of the other lawyer who was representing the school. He didn't say that in December 2014, this law firm and Mr. Peterson did a joint presentation at a boarding school conference entitled Boundaries in Private School, the Gray Lines. They didn't disclose any of that. So there's always this tension between the police and victims who come forward who want investigation and who want to talk. We've had really good conversations with the Rhode Island State Police. I talked to them 3 times yesterday. these people know what they're doing. They always would prefer if people didn't say anything because there's a risk of flight, there's a risk of inconsistent statements, but there's an overriding interest that we explain to them, and they were very understanding about it. That there are people out there right now that are suffering too. People at the Chatham Hall School, where Mr. White was the Reverend White was the dean of students. Where Mr. Coleman, let me be clear, it's been a long day. Mr. White left the school in 1974, went on to Chatham Hall School in Virginia, then went to the Asheville Country Day School, then was the minister at a small parish in North Carolina. Mr. Coleman left and went on to educational settings, and he just took down his LinkedIn page and his social networking, but you'll see right there, current position, substitute choir director, New York City. These people still have access to kids. Reverend White's in a parish in Pennsylvania.
So are you not satisfied with Rhode Island State Police?
I'm very satisfied with it. We're very
But you also want an independent?
Absolutely. I mean, well, let me proceed at this point. If you read our report, it's 36 pages. It's got, I think, over 40 exhibits to it. We did a pretty good investigation in the last 2.5 weeks, and that's a good starting point for any investigation.
What kind of person?
What?
What kind of person?
Somebody, well, first of all, there's law firms that do this, like Debevoise and Plimpton, will come and do a solo investigation, then have nothing more to do, and have no relationship in the future. They did the Deerfield investigation. Louis Freeh did the investigation at Penn State, and the then current president of Penn State, Graham Spanier, lost his job because of that investigation. Kroll and Associates have done multiple investigations. I mean, if you hire your own lawyer to do the investigation, what are the trustees saying? We don't want any of this to come back on us or current school leadership. It has no credibility. So we're also told now there's a new law firm involved. So we look forward to meeting with them. It's a law firm we're very familiar with. Yeah, we just got that one.
Can I add this?
Yeah, sure. Carmen.
There's a limit to what the police can do. They certainly are going to try to do the best job they can, but the only thing they can prosecute for, given the time periods involved, are the crimes, is the crime of rape. A very large number of the people we're dealing with were not raped, and therefore they're going to be outside the scope of their investigation.
Was it just first-degree sexual assault?
Right, first-degree sexual assault in Rhode Island.
Second and third degree?
Second and third-degree sexual assault is gone.
Yeah.
And also, failure to report suspected child abuse is a crime in Rhode Island that is punishable by a misdemeanor and up to a year in jail. We don't know whether it's too late to do something about that, because this all just came to light that these crimes weren't reported. This just happened.
Yeah, that's the only point.
I'm sorry, Carl.
Harry, I have to ask you that, I'm sorry for what happened to you. Seeing that picture in your book, with the caption underneath it, what does that do to you? And to hear that other photo caption in the 70s, of course, predators are predators, but what does that say to you about what was permissible at the school?
Well, the people that did that yearbook are the people that were responsible. That yearbook has actually been banned from St. George's, the 1979 yearbook. It's all full of drugs and comments like that. It was.
I just think it was an environment that was taken over by evil, and I'm going to leave it at that. And just the evil for me was experiencing what another student who ran amok throughout the school affected all of us, both boys and girls. And he wasn't alone, but he was the guy that set the tone. We were scared out of our minds every night. If we were called out in the hall, you just didn't know what was going to happen to you. So there were a lot of great people there when I was there, and it's amazing how really one person can affect a small community, and I think that was the case.
You can ask them to identify who by police?
Yes.
It was one person, and that was
Yes.
security, you were a freshman.
Yes,
And your picture was the one in the yearbook.
correct.
And that picture, by the way, just was taken at a later time
Yeah, that
by a
was-
friend.
That wasn't the same. Yeah, that was later, and I was happy at the time. But the implication or the direct connection was talking about my event.
Because it was
And
so
for me,
widespread,
it's-
it was
yeah.
so known on campus.
Oh, everyone knew.
Yeah, we were there at the time, and and you support that. Yeah, the incident was known about,
Sure.
talked about.
Teachers by teachers and staff as well.
I don't know about that, but
They had to have
the
known.
student body.
I never heard from the staff. It
Yeah,
was just,
yeah.
it was students.
But it's if you're sexually abused, the shame and the humiliation you feel just to begin with, and then to be publicly humiliated on top of that, and then on top of that to be humiliated by the adults and leadership authority figures at the school is just unacceptable.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Eric, forgive my ignorance here. Can you delve into more of the issue with the gag order? What happened there? Why it was important? How it's like silence it.
Oh, yeah, sure. And I want Ann to speak to this too. When you dismissed, Ann decided to drop her case for the reasons she's expressed in 1989. This was an all-out assault on her family. There was an all-out assault by now Justice Robinson. When he asked for Ann's name to be public, she'd had enough. She wanted to drop it. I called up Mr. Robinson and I said, we're going to drop the case. He said, sorry, you need my assent if you're going to drop it without court approval. So Justice Robinson said that there had to be an agreement that Ann would not speak. I spoke to Ann about that. Ann, you want to take over from here? I spoke to you. Okay. Ann said, I want the case over. It's a nightmare. I said, if I can breach the attorney-client privilege, is that okay with you? I said, don't do it. It was my first sexual assault case. I'd never had a sexual abuse case before. It just struck me as unbelievable. They're not giving you any money. I mean, they're not paying you. And Ann said, I just want to save my family. And so this was a condition. This was a condition imposed by St. George's School.
And I tried for years to find out what happened to Ann, and I couldn't find her anywhere. She just vanished. Me and a few other girls, it's been haunting us to find out what happened to her.
Sorry, was Robinson at the time? He's now.
He was a senior partner at Edwards and Angel, the biggest law firm in Rhode Island. He was one of the lawyers for the school. There were several.
And he's a Supreme Court justice.
He is a Supreme Court justice in Rhode Island.
And he wanted Ann to use her name publicly as part of an effort to humiliate her.
You'd have to talk to him about that. What he said, we've got the court transcript for you. What he said to Magistrate Hagopian in March of 1989 was one of the reasons why this was important to have her name be made public was in the event that there was a suggestion of consensual, a volitional, he described it, relationship between then 15-year-old Ann Scott and the 67-year-old athletic trainer.
And he also said that if he could use my name, he could find witnesses to come forward to say that I was a habitual liar.
One thing that is in the, this is unrelated perhaps, one of the things that's in the school's report is that the school was advised not to report Mr. Coleman in 1988, the same time period, by the school's attorney. I don't know who the school's attorney was at that time. Mr. Robinson was representing the school in the Scott litigation. So I think that's a question that needs to be, we've asked the school to disclose who that attorney is. That's very serious because, again, this was a man who was fired, Mr. Coleman, fired by the school for sexual misconduct. They came to the school from, I believe, the Kent School with a potential cloud hanging over them. We've asked the Kent School what was known. There's an interrelationship here with all these private schools. The Reverend White came from St. Paul's School. We'd like to know what the circumstances were of his departure from those places. There's a sort of a, at the time, I guess you describe it, what, Carmen, as an old boys club with these private school heads. And we want to know whether this was like the Catholic Church, whether, the bad apples got farmed out to other places where they'd have a feast on unsuspecting victims.
Yeah, and the simple truth is there are 6, maybe more perpetrators who were never reported. Not one of them was reported, and all of them were given essentially an open door to go on to other environments where they could be with children. That's not good enough.
Come over, move on.
Can I just tell you that I have magical powers, apparently. Can I just tell you that sexual abuse in education is the clergy abuse crisis of this decade, if not this century. And you're going to see more and more of it. There is a bill before the legislature. It's called, it's not its real name, but it's called the Pass the Trash Bill. And the idea behind this bill is that schools, when they have a problem with a teacher, they pass them on to someplace else without saying anything about what's happened. We had a very interesting legislative hearing on this because this was combined with another bill which would have made the age at which you could give consent 18 if there was a teacher involved, instead of the 16-year age of consent. And several of the legislators said to me, well, if it's this bad, why don't we just make it a crime in Massachusetts for a teacher to have a sexual relationship with a student? And I said, I think that's a great idea if you can do it, and I know that's under consideration. The Pass the Trash Bill would make it a crime to fail to report accurately about a prior complaint of sexual misconduct in a school. And the reason we need this is we're seeing dozens of educational cases in which teachers are not reporting what other teachers are doing. Teachers are saying to someone who's accused, even if they know it's an accurate report, don't worry, you're a good person, you'll get by this. And we're seeing in public schools, teachers are being supported by their teachers' unions no matter how serious the allegation of sexual abuse. So education has to be the next area in which there has to be this kind of focus, and part of it's going to have to be a legislative response.
Would that apply to private school teachers?
Yes, it would.
Second question, you guys said that you had 7 alleged perpetrators and the school had 6. How many of those were common?
We don't know for sure. Here's what we know that we have in common with the school. We have perpetrator number 3 in the school report that they didn't disclose his name. He's Mr. Coleman. Perpetrator number 2 in the school report. There are only 3 identified with multiple victims. That's Reverend White. Perpetrator number 1 is Al Gibbs, deceased. What Mr. Groome has spoken about, we believe to be perpetrator student number, I think it's 2 in the St. George's report. We're not sure. But we're not sure about some, but there's others that we have that the school doesn't have. There was one person who couldn't be here today who was also a victim of school rape in the 1980s. He reported to an administrator at St. George's at the time what had happened to him. He was told, and it's in the Globe story today, to quote-unquote grow up. That administrator has been accused by a former member of the Board of Trustees from an earlier time of taking him to a cabin, being in the same bed naked with him when he was drunk, assaulting him. The boy at the time got out of bed, searched the house for a weapon because the teacher had passed out in the bed, but he was terrified. He found a revolver in a drawer, and he had to go back into the room because it was the only room that was heated. And he stayed in that room in a corner with that revolver for the rest of the night. And this same administrator was also involved in the Coleman situation. So we're sort of trying to fit the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah. You have to think not of the adults who are sitting here. You have to think of 14-year-old kids who are away from home, who don't have any immediate support system, and the adults in their lives are treating them in a particular way, and they just don't know what to do or how to respond or where they can go to respond. And the few times that they're able to say something, instead of the other adults saying, of course, we'll help you whatever way we can, they're disbelieved, they're intimidated, and it's made clear to them that they're not going to get any help that way, and they have to live with it.
Are you aware of any of the alleged perpetrators being convicted or accused of crimes that are not related to St. George's?
No. That's one of the problems. I mean, you just look at historically at what happened. I mean, Carmen said earlier, you've got some people here that, based upon one admission and descriptions in the other guy from multiple boys of people who were really skilled at grooming. And what groomers do is they take people under their wing, they gain their confidence, they give them gifts, they give them presents, they make them feel guilty when, that isn't reciprocated sufficiently. They pick on people who are vulnerable. For example, a boy who had lost his father at the end of the sophomore year, in the case of Reverend Coleman, and Mr. Coleman. So they're very skilled. So it doesn't surprise us in the least. But Harry did something. I mean, sorry, not Harry, but Hawk Kramer did something about his perpetrator. He called up the Tampa Prep School where Mr. Coleman worked and spoke to them. But he asked Mr. Peterson to do the same thing too, because he's just somebody calling up, you know? But the school calling up and saying, you got a problem down there, that's significant. Mr. Coleman was at that school for at least 4 years after Mr. Kramer made his report to Mr. Peterson. Tough questions that need to be answered. What was done?
So Eric,
Did we answer
I'm sorry, we answer your question?
about the gag? I just.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. And I wanted you to talk, yeah, I'm sorry.
well, I just wanted, go ahead.
No, go. I just want to make sure we're answering your question.
Well, sure, I just have a separate question.
Okay.
It's just, of all the information that you've learned, Eric, how many different perpetrators do you need to work?
Well, I'm just reporting certainly we've had allegations from some people that we did not find to be credible, okay? For example, one person...
How many do you feel confident in saying? There was X amount?
I feel confident in saying that there are 7. That there are 7 individuals with credible allegations, and that people are going forward, at least 4 people are going forward with interviews with the Rhode Island State Police this week or next to talk about that.
And how many different perpetrators do you confident in 7?
Well, some are dead. Three are dead.
Right.
There's 2 that we've been doing this for 2.5 weeks.
Right.
I mean, it's only really Carmen and me and Attorney Burns over there that have been doing this. So at this point, there's 2 others that we're looking at. One of them is deceased, who was working at the school. The other one is alive. So, we're not going to go out and make statements identifying people until we've done a thorough investigation. And we thought long and hard of it and consulted with our clients before disclosing Reverend White and Mr. Coleman. We thought long and hard about it. And we got a lot of assistance. But we decided to do it because they're out there. One of them admitted it. The other one had multiple allegations against him. We have multiple victims who've spoken of him. And we thought it was the right thing to do. Now, it would have been nice if St. George's had joined us in that.
Is there 7 perpetrators?
Pardon me?
Is it 7?
7, including Gibbs. No. We're including them all. All of them, 7 former staff members of St. George's.
How many are
Staff?
Staff?
Well, 7
Not all
alleged
are teachers.
perpetrators. Not all are teachers. Okay.
Al Gibbs was a trainer.
Well, Gibbs was a trainer. We're not going to identify at this point
I thought
the.
some of them were.
No. Okay, no.
Yeah,
Let's be clear about it.
Yeah.
7 allegations against former St. George's staff, not just faculty, staff. I'm going to leave it at that. Then there are allegations made against 4 students and they're all the same, people incoming to the school as freshmen that were raped, okay, by 4 separate students, yes. And the students are able, except in one case, to identify their perpetrators. In 2 of those cases, they can identify witnesses, which they're going to provide to the state police. And in one of the cases involving a woman who was raped in 1976 at 20 House in St. George's, the perpetrator, who she knew, broke in through her window and came into the room and raped her. And she's going to be talking to the Rhode Island State Police this week.
And what's the most recent allegation?
2004.
Not when the abuse actually happened
2004.
at the school.
There is an allegation of abuse in 2004. We're still looking at that. We just, basically got word of it. We have been working very, very hard. We've asked the school for an explanation. We've informed the police about this in 2004. We spoke to the state police
So
2 days ago.
it spans 1974
So it spans.
to 2004.
Yeah.
Let me try to put this in context for you in terms of how people process this stuff. We're talking about what we've heard in a very compressed period of time. It's remarkable how many people have come forward in that short period of time. The Boston Archdiocese had 552 people who settled claims in 2003. Since then, we have continued. There was another group of about 200 that came forward within a couple of years. Since then, every year there are 20, 30, 40 people that come forward. Some of those people are still naming priests that were never named before, because even though we had that big thing, 12 years ago now, there are still people who have not been able to process what happened to them until now. It may be because they had to get over being alcoholics and get sober. It may be because they had children and their children are suddenly the age they were when they were abused, and now that's brought it to them forcefully. Or it could be that simply they were in mental health treatment and something came up that way. So there's no way in which you can say in the short period of time we've been doing this that we've heard everything there is to hear here. It's a remarkably large number for that short period of time.
So
at
far,
this
2004.
At this
Yes.
point, the two of you are representing 42 people.
Well, we representing is hard to say. We don't have even the time to talk to people about whether they want us to represent them. What we've done is we've taken calls from people and we've facilitated conversations with the police. People have asked us to speak to St. George's about what happened to them. We've been asked to try to get this whole mental health assistance program straightened out today. We're very pleased that Peg Langenhammer from Day One in Rhode Island is down here at this press conference. And I talked to her on the weekend, I think. And that's a very impressive organization that wasn't contracted with St. George's, but they contacted contacted Peg and Day One. And they are now set up to take calls from alumni. We didn't have that until it was announced on the 2nd of November by Mr. Peterson, but nothing was in place until recently.
But in 2 weeks, you two have become aware of 42 alleged victims.
40.
40.
I mean, it kind of changes by the hour, but 40. And then some people we've talked to that we just didn't, quite frankly, to tell you the truth, prioritize and believe. I mean, I won't go into all those conversations, and we're going to look back at them, but, we just didn't find them to be credible. But it's not for us to decide, it's for the police. And the police, I've encouraged everybody to talk to the police.
What is the status of any litigation?
There's no litigation. We haven't even discussed any litigation. Carmen's been working, around the clock, and Ann Scott has been.
It's been much more like crisis intervention.
It's been
Since the story ran on December 15th, we now have 700 signatures on an online petition. People have been sharing their stories on that. People have been calling, and some people have just been remembering this since the article and the letters from Peterson this year. So our immediate priority was really to help them and to get them assistance.
It's been amazing. There is a closed Facebook page for St. George's students or alumni. As of 2 months ago, 3 months ago, there's maybe 250, 300 members. It's now up to 701 as of today. It's just, and the things I've
Talking about this.
talking about that. I mean, that's where I
Hey, you wanna
came
talk a little bit
across
about that,
Harry,
about
and
the
people
Facebook
are telling
page?
their
Yeah.
stories on this page, and
I mean, the tone, I just have to say, it started with Ann and Bijie and Katie on this whole thing. The tone of conversation on this Facebook page is so respectful, so supportive, even if people differ on opinions by degree. It is a supportive, just almost, I can't believe this happened.
And we wanted that dialogue.
Absolutely.
We want the school to survive and thrive in the future. We want them to have a healthy, open dialogue. All views welcome, and we want
but if
them
there's
to figure
that many
out
of
how
us
they're
on this
gonna-
Facebook page, there's so many others who aren't on Facebook.
Yeah, but we just
So-
want the school to figure out, and the school community as a whole, including us, to know how they're going to respond to this issue in a healthy way, in a productive way.
At any given time, what's the population of the school?
400. It was 250 when in our day.
It's 400.
It was like 350.
Tuition is what?
Yeah, 90
How much is
class.
tuition a year? $56,000.
$56,000.
And let's be clear. We want to hear from everybody out there that we possibly can hear from who's had an adverse experience. Because we think every one of them deserves to be heard by the school and deserves to be helped in any way that they can be helped by the school.
Clearly, at some point, though, Eric, there's going to be a civil lawsuit.
No, I mean, to tell you the truth, we have not talked about that at all. We literally have not talked about that. I was an alumnus to the school, okay? I cared about this place. I had mixed feelings about my experience there, but no one's talking about litigation right now.
No, it's the cover-up. It's the constant denial of all these years of them saying, nothing happened to you. You're nuts.
We
And it's the not doing the right thing when the right thing is known.
You know,
it's
they're-
known today exactly what the school should do.
The
and
school's
they're not
December
doing it.
23rd thing said, oh, we'll consider taking his name down. What do you mean consider taking his name down off the dorm? Take it off. The guy covered it all up.
So the school took 10.5 months to do its report. We produced 8 with no exhibits and a lot of conclusions with wrong facts that was incorrect. In 2.5 weeks, Mr. Durso and I and Sarah, with the help of Ann, Harry, and Katie, and other alumni, have put together a really comprehensive report with multiple exhibits and documents going back to the 1970s, and I would really urge people to take a look at it.
How many headmasters and administrators do you think violated the reporting law?
Well, Reverend Andrews, let's just go by what St. George's said. Reverend Andrews, right? And you've got Mr. Hamblett, and according to the 2004 report, a dean of students, and Mr. Peterson. That's, again, we want to work more on that before we draw any conclusions. Then Mr. Zane. And then the interesting thing about Rhode Island law is that unlike Massachusetts, which defines who's a mandatory reporter, in Rhode Island, it's everybody. Anyone who has reasonable cause to believe that sexual abuse or neglect occurs must report within 24 hours. So that would include Dr. Kossoff, who didn't report. And I think that we've gone back, and Sarah Burns can maybe speak to this, but looked at the statute as it was while she's shaking her head. But the statute has pretty much been the same, as I understand it, for years in Rhode Island. It was very inclusive. These laws, mandatory reporting laws, were all adopted in the mid-1960s as part of a federal educational conditional spending grant. So almost all states adopted them then. And I remember, even though I was like a college student, a high school student, that these people in private schools, they got educated on this law. There's no ambiguity in the law.
They were mandated when this happened.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the same in Massachusetts with what we call 51As.
Plus, in 1971 or 72, you had Title IX passed. And Title IX requires any school that receives federal funds to set up a program to make sure that no one is sexually harassed or sexually abused. So, it's been all over education that you have these obligations. And yet you go to schools and they don't have a reporting system under the mandatory reporting law. They don't have a Title IX coordinator to perform their duties under that. A lot of these schools just don't think it's important. They think that the people they work with are such fine people they couldn't possibly be doing anything wrong. Yet what we know is that the kind of people who abuse kids are attracted to these kinds of environments.
When Katie reported to Mr. Zane, Mr. Zane was quoted in the newspaper as stating that he believed Katie, but there was nothing that he could do because Gibbs denied it, and the report from Katie was hearsay. It wasn't hearsay. Katie was reporting it. Katie was sent to see a mental health professional because Mr. Zane thought, allegedly, that she was ill.
I was making it all up.
Anne's been described, I won't go into it. It's too awful. No, it's really awful what Mr. Zane has said about Anne.
And as recently as 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, we've been referred to as vipers by Mr. Zane. Vipers.
Where is he now?
Zane lives in New Bedford. He was the former director of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. I think he's vacationing in Vero Beach, I think.
Oh,
Vero
great.
Beach,
I'm going
Florida.
down there in 3 weeks.
Well, he's
Wouldn't
New
that be
Bedford,
fun?
longtime Massachusetts resident. The director of the Whaling Museum in New Bedford. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.